The heavy glass doors of the elite boardroom swing open, but it's not a billionaire who walks in. It's Seung-jae, a lowly delivery boy in a faded gray t-shirt and a visor cap that shadows his unreadable eyes. He holds a $10 bag of noodles with hands that are far too steady, standing like a grounded fighter in a room full of corporate sharks. Mi-rae, the powerful heiress, is seconds away from losing her family empire to her treacherous uncle, who sneers at her desperation. "Look at you," he mocks, gesturing to Seung-jae, reduced to eating street food like a peasant. "Even this delivery boy has more dignity than you today." As the uncle tries to shove him aside, Seung-jae doesn't budge. He stands like a mountain, his presence suddenly suffocating the room. "You shouldn't sign that," he says, his voice vibrating with a hidden authority that makes the air turn cold. He casually points to a tiny, hidden clause in the contract that would trigger a massive, secret debt. The room falls into a deafening silence. Mi-rae is stunned, not just by the warning, but by the sharp, calculating gaze of the man she thought was beneath her notice. But pride is a dangerous thing. Feeling exposed and humiliated by a stranger's help, Mi-rae snaps. "Get out," she commands, her voice trembling with irritation. "I don't need business advice from a delivery boy who should know his place." She rejects him and throws a stack of bills at his feet, unaware that the man she just insulted is the legendary Underworld Emperor, the only person powerful enough to stop the assassins already waiting for her in the shadows of the parking garage. Seung-jae walked out of the towering glass headquarters, his boots clicking softly on the pavement. To the high-powered executives rushing past him, he was invisible, just another worker in a faded gray shirt and a visor cap. He reached his old battered scooter parked at the curb and rested his hands on the handlebars. He looked back at the top floor of the building, where Mi-rae was likely still angry from their meeting. Her sharp words and the way she looked down at him still stung, but Seung-jae's face remained as calm as a still lake. As he went to start his scooter, a sudden memory washed over him, pulling him back into a world he had tried to leave behind. He wasn't always a delivery boy. Not long ago, he was the Underworld Emperor, a man whose name made the city's most dangerous criminals shake with fear. He remembered sitting on a throne of power, the smell of expensive cigars, and the long lines of men who bowed before him, waiting for his command to start a war. He had everything: money, power, and respect. But he had seen the dark side of that life. He remembered the night he stood over his best friend, who had been killed because of a fight for power that Seung-jae couldn't stop. He remembered the empty feeling in his heart as he realized that the more power he gained, the more blood he had to wash off his hands. He didn't want the wealth anymore. He wanted peace. He wanted a life where he could simply breathe without constantly looking over his shoulder. So, he had vanished, leaving his empire behind to become a ghost in a simple delivery uniform. The roar of an engine snapped him back to the present. His eyes, sharp and careful, scanned the street. Two sleek, black SUVs with dark windows were circling the block at a slow, scary pace. They weren't there for a business meeting. He noticed the way they stayed near the garage exit and how the drivers kept their faces hidden. To anyone else, they were just expensive cars. To Seung-jae, they were wolves waiting to attack. He looked up at the skyscraper once more. He had seen that look in Mi-rae's eyes, the pride of a woman who thought she was in total control. She believed her biggest problem was business contracts and board meetings. She had no idea that her uncle wasn't just trying to take her company. He had hired professionals to take her life. This wasn't a business disagreement anymore. It was a planned hit. Seung-jae felt the familiar pull of his old life, the deep instinct to protect and the cold focus of a warrior. He had promised himself he was done with violence, but he couldn't just walk away and let an innocent person get hurt. Mi-rae had been mean to him, and she had looked at him like he was dirt beneath her expensive shoes, but she didn't deserve to die in a dark parking garage. He didn't start his scooter. Instead, he adjusted his cap, pulling the visor lower to hide his face in the shadows. He leaned against the seat, blending back into the background, watching the black SUVs as they turned toward the entrance. The delivery boy was gone, replaced by the man who used to rule the shadows. The corporate world was about to get very dangerous, and if Mi-rae wanted to survive the night, she was going to need the very man she had just kicked out of her office. Mi-rae stepped into the cool, dim air of the underground parking garage, her heels clicking loudly against the concrete. The silence of the garage usually felt safe and private, but today she felt a strange prickle on the back of her neck. She spotted the delivery boy, Seung-jae, standing near his beat-up scooter. He wasn't leaving. He was just standing there, leaning against the seat with his arms crossed, watching the entrance like a hawk. Seeing him reminded her of the humiliation she had felt in the boardroom. How dare a stranger, a man who delivered noodles for a living, act like he knew more about her business than she did? She marched toward him, her face set in a hard, arrogant mask. Stopping a few feet away, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe you think you can blackmail me because you overheard a private conversation. Or maybe you just want to feel important." She held out the envelope, her lip curling in a sneer. "Take this. It's more money than you'd make in a year of delivering food. Take it and forget you ever walked into that office. Forget my face, forget my name, and most importantly, stay in your lane. People like you don't belong in my world." Seung-jae didn't even look at the money. His eyes remained fixed on the dark corners of the garage. "Keep your cash, Mi-rae," he said quietly. His voice was steady and lacked the submissive tone she expected from someone in his position. "I didn't come here for a payout. I came here to tell you that you're in danger. The men in the SUVs outside aren't here to talk about contracts." Mi-rae let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She tossed the envelope at his feet, watching it hit the dusty floor with a dull thud. "You've been watching too many movies, delivery boy," she snapped. "This is the real world. Problems are solved with lawyers and bank accounts, not street rumors. My uncle is greedy, but he isn't a criminal. I don't need street smarts from someone who smells like exhaust fumes." She turned her back on him, heading toward her sleek white sedan. "Know your place, Seung-jae. You're a worker. I'm the CEO. Go back to your scooter before I have security drag you out of here." "The wolves don't care about your title," Seung-jae called out, his voice turning cold. "They only care about the kill. If you get in that car, you're a sitting duck." Mi-rae ignored him, her hand reaching for the car door handle. She felt a surge of triumph, thinking she had finally put the arrogant stranger in his place. She was a queen in her kingdom, and he was nothing. Then, the silence of the garage was shattered. Crack. The sound was deafening, echoing off the concrete walls like a thunderclap. The driver's side window of Mi-rae's car exploded into 1,000 glittering shards of glass. Mi-rae screamed, diving to the ground as a second shot punched a hole through the metal of the door just inches from where her head had been. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, sharp and terrifying. In an instant, her world of luxury and corporate power vanished, replaced by a cold, raw fear she had never known. She looked up, trembling, and saw the black SUVs roaring down the ramp, tires screeching as they headed straight for her. Through the chaos, she saw Seung-jae. He wasn't running away. He wasn't hiding. He was moving toward her, his body low and his eyes burning with a fire that didn't belong to a delivery boy. She realized then, with a sick feeling in her stomach, that everything he had warned her about was real, and that the man she had just treated like trash was the only thing standing between her and a bullet. The black SUVs screeched to a halt, blocking both exits of the parking level. Doors flew open, and 4 men in tactical gear stepped out, their faces hidden by dark masks. They didn't hesitate. One raised a suppressed weapon, aiming directly at Mi-rae, who was frozen against her car door. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. She had spent her whole life managing budgets and boardrooms, but none of that could save her from a piece of lead moving at the speed of sound. Before the trigger could be pulled, a blur of movement cut through the dim light. Seung-jae, who had been standing several yards away, launched himself forward. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from a nearby pillar. With a single, fluid motion, he hurled it. The heavy canister whistled through the air, slamming into the first gunman's chest with a sickening thud before he could fire a shot. Seung-jae didn't stop. He moved with a terrifying, predator-like speed that made him look less like a delivery boy and more like a force of nature. He reached the second man before the assassin could even readjust his aim. Seung-jae's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist and twisting it with a loud crack. The gun clattered to the floor, but Seung-jae wasn't finished. He used the man's own momentum to swing him into a concrete pillar, knocking him unconscious instantly. Mi-rae watched, breathless and trembling. This wasn't street fighting. This was high-level, lethal precision. Every strike Seung-jae landed was calculated to disable or destroy. He moved through the remaining two men like they were made of paper. When one tried to tackle him, Seung-jae used a nearby shopping cart, shoving it with immense force into the attacker's knees before finishing him with a lightning-fast strike to the temple. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. Seung-jae stood among the groaning men, his chest barely heaving. His gray t-shirt was dusty, and his visor cap was slightly crooked, but he looked completely untouched. The quiet dominance she had noticed earlier was now a deafening roar. He turned his head slightly, his sharp, calculating eyes meeting hers. For a moment, Mi-rae didn't see a worker. She saw a king standing over a battlefield. "Get in the car," he said. His voice wasn't a suggestion, it was a command that forced her legs to move. "Lock the doors. Don't come out until you hear sirens." "Who? What are you?" Mi-rae whispered, her voice shaking. Her mind was spinning. No delivery boy could move like that. No ordinary citizen possessed that kind of cold, efficient violence. In the distance, the faint wail of police sirens began to echo down the concrete ramp. The wolves had failed, and help was finally coming. Seung-jae didn't answer her. He walked over to his battered scooter and picked up the delivery box he had dropped. He checked the contents, a few spilled noodles and a cracked plastic lid, and sighed as if the ruined food was a bigger tragedy than the 4 men he had just neutralized. "The police will be here in 2 minutes, Seung-jae said, his back to her. "Tell them you don't know who saved you. If you mention me, more wolves will come. And next time, I might not be hungry enough to deliver your dinner." By the time the blue and red lights began to flash against the garage walls, the scooter was already humming. Mi-rae scrambled to the window, wanting to call out to him, to demand the truth, to apologize, anything. But all she saw was the faint red glow of a taillight disappearing into the night. She sat in the silence of her car, surrounded by broken glass and unconscious assassins. Her life as a powerful CEO felt like a fragile lie. She had rejected him, insulted him, and called him trash. Yet, he had moved like a god to save her life. As the officers rushed toward her car, Mi-rae didn't feel relieved. She felt a burning, terrifying curiosity. She had to find out who he was. Because the delivery boy was the most dangerous man she had ever met. Mi-rae spent the next 24 hours in a state of pure terror. After the police finished their questioning, she returned to her luxury penthouse only to find her head of security nowhere to be found. 2 of her personal guards had mysteriously quit via text, and her car had been tampered with again. Every shadow in the hallway looked like a hitman, and every phone call sounded like a threat. She was a billionaire with 1,000 employees, but at that moment, she realized she was completely alone. There was only one person she could think of who wasn't afraid of the black SUVs. It took her private investigators only 3 hours to find him. Seung-jae lived in a part of the city Mi-rae usually only saw from the window of a moving car. The apartment building was old, with cracked brick walls and a flickering light in the hallway that smelled of rain and cheap cooking oil. She felt out of place in her tailored navy suit, but she gritted her teeth and knocked on the door of Unit 4B. The door opened to reveal Seung-jae. He wasn't wearing his visor cap now. His hair was messy, and he was wearing a simple black tank top that showed off the heavy muscles of his shoulders and the faint scars on his arms. He didn't look surprised to see her. He just stood there, his expression as unreadable as ever. "I have $1 billion in the bank, and yet I can't find a single person I trust to keep me alive until Friday," Mi-rae said, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound powerful. She stepped into the tiny room without being invited. It was spotless, but nearly empty, a bed, a chair, and a single photo frame turned face down. Seung-jae leaned against the doorframe. "Trust is expensive, Mi-rae. And I'm not for sale." "Everyone has a price," she snapped, regaining some of her corporate fire. She pulled out a contract she had drafted. "I'll pay you 10 times what a top-tier security firm charges. $50,000 a week. You'll be my personal driver. You stay near me, you drive the car, and you keep those wolves away." Seung-jae looked at the contract and then back at her. He didn't look impressed by the money. To him, $50,000 looked like pocket change, a fact that would have baffled Mi-rae if she knew his true history. "I'll do it," he said finally. "But I have conditions." I am a driver, nothing more. I wear my delivery uniform, not a suit. You don't introduce me to your friends, and you don't tell anyone what I did in that garage. I stay invisible. If you try to turn me into a trophy bodyguard, I walk away." Mi-rae felt a surge of relief, but her pride still needed a win. She looked around the cramped, poor apartment and felt a sense of superiority return. He might be a great fighter, but he was still just a man living in a box. "Fine," she said, her voice turning cold and dismissive again. "You can keep your little, invisible rule. To be honest, I'd prefer it that way. It would be embarrassing to explain why a delivery boy is following me around. You start at 6 a.m. sharp. You'll wait in the car, you'll carry my bags, and you'll speak only when spoken to." She turned to leave, feeling like she had regained control. She would treat him like a servant, a tool to be used and then discarded once the danger was over. It was the only way to keep him in his place and forget the way her heart had raced when he saved her. Seung-jae watched her walk down the hallway. He knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to make him small so she could feel big again. He didn't mind. Being a servant was a small price to pay for the vantage point it gave him. From the driver's seat of her car, he could watch her enemies, track the Black Dragon Syndicate, and finish the war he had started years ago. Mi-rae thought she had hired a driver. She had no idea she had just invited the Emperor of the Underworld into her passenger seat. The next morning, Seung-jae stood by the sleek black sedan in the penthouse garage, wearing his faded gray delivery shirt and his visor cap pulled low. When Mi-rae walked toward the car, she didn't even look at him. She simply tossed her designer briefcase at his chest, expecting him to catch it. "The office first, then the Citibank," she commanded, sliding into the back seat without a word of thanks. "And try not to drive like you're on a scooter. I have important calls to make." Seung-jae placed her bag in the passenger seat and took the wheel. As he navigated through the morning traffic, he looked like a quiet, submissive driver. But beneath the dashboard, his left hand was tapping a rhythm onto a small, encrypted device hidden in the steering column. While Mi-rae was busy arguing with her lawyers over the phone, Seung-jae was activating his old shadow network. With a few silent taps, he sent a high-priority command to his former lieutenants. Subject: Director Kong. Goal: total audit. Within minutes, the device pulsed against his palm. Information began to flood in: secret bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, falsified invoices for construction projects, and a series of private meetings with the Black Dragon Syndicate. Director Kong wasn't just a greedy uncle, he was a traitor who had been bleeding the company dry for years. Seung-jae glanced in the rearview mirror. Mi-rae looked exhausted, her head resting against the window as she stared at the passing buildings. She looked like a queen whose throne was made of glass, ready to shatter at any moment. He pulled into the bank's parking lot and stepped out to open her door. As she climbed out, he purposely brushed against a folder he had prepared earlier, knocking it onto the floor mat of the back seat. "Wait," he said, his voice flat and neutral. "You dropped something, boss." Mi-rae looked down, irritated. "I didn't drop anything. Just pick it up and put it in the glove box." "It looks important," Seung-jae insisted, holding the folder out just enough for the top page to be visible. "It has Director Kang's name on it." Mi-rae froze. She snatched the folder from his hand, her eyes narrowing. "Where did this come from?" "I found it wedged in the seat when I was cleaning the car this morning," he lied smoothly. "Maybe the previous driver left it." She opened the folder, and her face went pale. The documents inside were a detailed map of her uncle's crimes, dates, amounts, and account numbers that her own internal investigators had spent months failing to find. It was a goldmine of evidence. This is impossible," she whispered, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. She looked at Seung-jae, her sharp eyes searching his face for any sign of a trick. "How could my driver find something my lawyers couldn't?" Seung-jae just shrugged, his expression as unreadable as ever. "I'm just a delivery boy, boss. I just know how to find things that people try to hide." As she walked into the bank, her stride was different, stronger, more confident. She didn't know it yet, but the trash she had hired was systematically dismantling her enemies while she slept. Later that afternoon, as they drove back to the office, news broke on the radio. 2 of the board members who had been siding with Director Kong had suddenly resigned due to personal scandals. Mi-rae stared at the back of Seung-jae's head, a strange feeling growing in her chest. First, the parking garage fight. Now, the perfect evidence appearing out of thin air. And every time a problem vanished, this quiet man with the sharp eyes was standing right there. "Seung-jae," she said softly, watching him in the mirror. "Yes, boss. Who are you, really?" Seung-jae didn't flinch. He just kept his eyes on the road, a small ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I told you. I'm just the guy who makes sure your dinner, and your life, arrives on time." Mi-rae didn't believe him for a second. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him as a servant. She was looking at him as a mystery she was desperate to solve. Morning, Mi-rae decided she couldn't stand looking at Seung-jae's faded delivery shirt for another second. It was a reminder of the world he came from, a world she wanted to keep separate from her own. She directed him to drive to a high-end tailor shop, a place where the carpets were thick and the air smelled of expensive silk and cedar. "Since you're going to be my driver, you need to look the part," she said as they stepped inside. She felt a surge of her old arrogance. She wanted to remind him who was in charge. "The visor cap and the cheap cotton have to go. You look like you're about to deliver a pizza, not drive a CEO." She began picking out the most restrictive, uncomfortable-looking uniforms she could find. She pointed to a stiff, high-collared jacket and a pair of heavy trousers. "Try these on," she commanded, a playful, mean glint in her eyes. She expected him to look awkward and out of place, like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Seung-jae took the pile of clothes without a word. He disappeared behind the heavy velvet curtain of the fitting room. Mi-rae sat on a leather sofa, sipping sparkling water and waiting for the laugh she was sure was coming. But when the curtain finally pulled back, the laughter died in her throat. Seung-jae hadn't put on the stiff uniform. Instead, the master tailor, who had recognized something in Seung-jae's posture, had handed him a midnight black, custom-tailored suit. As Seung-jae stepped into the light, the entire shop went dead silent. The tailors stopped their work, and the other wealthy customers turned to stare. The suit hugged his broad shoulders and fit his athletic frame perfectly. Without the visor cap shadowing his face, his sharp, calculating features were on full display. He didn't look like a driver. He didn't even look like a businessman. He stood with a quiet dominance that filled the entire room. His gaze was calm and steady, the look of a man who was used to giving orders, not taking them. The simple elegance of the suit made him look like royalty returning to his throne. Mi-rae felt her breath catch. Her heart skipped a beat, a sudden, frantic thumping against her ribs that she couldn't explain. She had spent her life surrounded by men in expensive suits, but she had never seen anyone carry one like this. For a split second, the power dynamic shifted. She didn't feel like the boss looking at a servant. She felt like a girl looking at a king. "Is this proper enough, boss?" Seung-jae asked. His voice was low and smooth, pulling her out of her trance. Mi-rae quickly looked away, her face flushing a deep red. She stood up, smoothing her skirt to hide her trembling hands. It's fine," she managed to say, her voice smaller than usual. "Just pay for it and get back to the car. We're late for the meeting." As she hurried out of the shop, she couldn't shake the image of him in the mirror. She had tried to humiliate him, but he had ended up making her feel like the one who didn't belong. The mystery of her delivery boy was growing deeper, and for the first time, it wasn't just curiosity she was feeling, it was something much more dangerous. While Mi-rae sat in the back of the car, lost in her confusing thoughts about the man behind the wheel, a very different conversation was happening in a dark, smoke-filled room across the city. Director Kong sat nervously on the edge of a leather chair, facing a man with a jagged scar across his throat. This was the leader of the Black Dragon Syndicate, the ruthless group that had seized control of the underworld after the Emperor had vanished years ago. "My men are dead or in jail," the scarred man growled, throwing a tablet onto the table. "You said the girl was unprotected. But someone turned my best hitters into broken glass in that garage." Director Kong wiped sweat from his forehead. "It was just a fluke. She has a new driver, a delivery boy she picked up off the street. He's nobody. Nobody." The assassin sneered, hitting play on the security footage from the parking garage. The video was grainy, but it showed a blurry figure moving with impossible grace. The figure didn't just fight, He dismantled his opponents with a cold, surgical precision that looked like a terrifying dance. The room went deathly silent. The scarred man leaned closer to the screen, his eyes widening in recognition. He had seen that specific footwork once before, years ago, on a night when dozens of men had fallen before a single warrior. It was a style that belonged to only one person in the world, a man they thought had died or fled the country. "That's not a delivery boy," the assassin whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "That's him. The Emperor has come out of hiding." Director Kong looked confused. "The Emperor? You mean the Mafia boss? But he's just a guy on a scooter." "He's wearing a disguise, you fool!" the leader roared, standing up so quickly his chair flipped over. "He's playing a game, hiding right under your niece's nose. If the rest of the syndicate finds out he's alive, there will be a bloodbath to claim his head. Every hitman in the city will be looking for a man in a gray shirt." A cruel smile spread across the assassin's face. He turned to his lieutenants, who were already checking their weapons. "Forget the company for a moment. If we kill the ghost of the underworld, we will rule everything. Find that scooter. Find that girl. And bring me the Emperor's head." The hunt had officially begun. Seung-jae's peaceful life as a nobody was over, and the very shadow he had been running from had finally caught up to his tail lights. The atmosphere inside the boardroom was colder than a grave. Mi-rae stood at the head of the table, her hands trembling as she tried to log into her laptop. "Access denied," flashed in angry red letters across the screen. She looked up to see Director Kong leaning back in his chair, a look of pure triumph on his face. "What is the meaning of this?" Mi-rae demanded, her voice cracking. "It means you're finished, Mi-rae," her uncle said, sliding a thick stack of papers toward her. "The board has seen the evidence. Millions of dollars diverted to offshore accounts in your name. We've already contacted the authorities. For the sake of the family name, we aren't calling the police yet, but you are stripped of your title effective immediately." "You framed me," she cried out, looking at the other board members. "You all know I would never do this." But the men who had once bowed to her now refused to look her in the eye. They had been bought or bullied by Director Kong. Within 10 minutes, security guards, men who used to salute her every morning, were escorting her toward the exit. They didn't care about her legacy or the years she had spent building the empire. To them, she was now just a trespasser. The heavy glass doors hissed shut behind her, locking with a final metallic click. At that exact moment, the sky broke open. A heavy, freezing rain began to pour, soaking Mi-rae's expensive suit in seconds. She stood on the sidewalk, her hair clinging to her face, watching her name being scrubbed from the digital marquee above the entrance. She had no car, no access to her bank accounts, and no friends left to call. She was a queen without a kingdom, standing in the mud. Through the curtain of rain, she heard a familiar low hum. A single headlight cut through the gray mist. A battered scooter pulled up to the curb, splashing water onto her heels. Seung-jae kicked the stand down and hopped off. He wasn't wearing the expensive suit from the tailor. He was back in his simple gray delivery shirt, now soaked through. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't mock her for her pride. He simply took off his own rain jacket and draped it over her shivering shoulders. "The throne was just a chair, Mi-rae," he said quietly, his eyes steady and warm. "But the person sitting in it is still real. Let's go." Mi-rae looked at the small, humble scooter and then at the man she had called trash. Her arrogance was gone, washed away by the rain. Without a word, she climbed onto the back of the bike and held onto him tightly. As they rode away from the shining skyscraper, she realized that while the world had turned its back on her, the delivery boy was the only one who had come back to pick up the pieces. The small apartment was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic sound of rain hitting the window. Mi-rae sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her shoulders shaking. She had lost her company, her home, and her pride. The powerful CEO who once looked down on the world was now just a girl in a borrowed jacket, crying in a room that was smaller than her old walk-in closet. Seung-jae didn't try to give her empty words of comfort. He simply handed her a warm cup of tea and waited until her exhaustion finally took over. When her eyes closed and her breathing slowed into a deep sleep, he gently covered her with a blanket. He looked at her tear-stained face for a long moment, his expression hardening into stone. The delivery boy persona vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying stillness. He stepped out onto the tiny, rusted balcony. The city lights flickered in the distance, oblivious to the storm brewing in the shadows. Seung-jae pulled a sleek, pitch-black phone from a hidden pocket, a device that hadn't been turned on in 5 years. He dialed a single number. It was picked up on the first ring. There was no hello, only a heavy, expectant silence on the other end. "It's me," Seung-jae said. His voice was no longer humble or polite. It was the voice of a man who owned the night. On the other side of the city, a high-ranking Mafia lieutenant dropped his glass in shock. "Emperor, is it really you?" "Listen carefully," Seung-jae commanded, his eyes fixed on the glowing headquarters of the Kong Group. "The peace treaty is over. I want a total freeze on the markets. Cut off every line of credit to Director Kong. Drain his accounts, block his exports, and bury his stock price." "It will cause chaos, sire," the lieutenant whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "The world will know you've returned." "Let them know," Seung-jae replied, his gaze turning lethal. "Director Kong thought he could take everything from her. By the time the sun rises, I want him to realize he has nothing left but the clothes on his back. Collapse the Kong Group by dawn. That is an imperial order." He ended the call and looked back into the room at the sleeping Mi-rae. She had no idea that while she slept, the invisible delivery boy was rewriting the fate of the city. The wolves were about to find out that they hadn't been hunting a sheep, they had been poking a sleeping dragon. And now, the dragon was awake. The morning sun poked through the small window of the apartment, waking Mi-rae from the first deep sleep she had had in weeks. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until she smelled the scent of toasted bread and eggs. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and reached for her phone out of habit. Her heart sank, expecting to see more hateful news or legal threats. Instead, her screen was blowing up with alerts. The headlines were unbelievable. A mysterious global fund had appeared out of nowhere at 4 in the morning. They had bought every single cent of the Kong Group's debt. Even more shocking, the board of directors had held an emergency vote at dawn, firing Director Kong and begging Mi-rae to return as the CEO. Her name was back on the marquee. Her bank accounts were unfrozen. In a single night, her life had been handed back to her. "It's a miracle," Mi-rae whispered, her eyes wide with tears of joy. "I don't know who they are, but someone out there saved me." Seung-jae walked over, placing a simple plate of breakfast on the small table in front of her. He looked perfectly normal, wearing a plain white t-shirt, his expression calm and humble. "You look like you've seen a ghost, boss," he said softly. "Eat your eggs before they get cold." "Seung-jae, look." She shoved the phone toward him, her hands shaking. "The debt is gone. The company is mine again. Someone bought the whole thing just to give it back to me. Can you believe it?" Seung-jae glanced at the screen for a split second, then went back to pouring her a glass of orange juice. "The world is a strange place," he replied casually. "Maybe your luck finally changed. Or maybe that uncle of yours finally ran out of friends." Mi-rae started to nod, but then she paused. She looked at Seung-jae, really looked at him. He was acting like he didn't care, but she noticed something different. His eyes weren't the eyes of a simple delivery boy anymore. They were sharp, focused, and constantly darting toward her phone as if he already knew exactly what the next notification would be. He wasn't surprised by the miracle. He was watching the results of it. "You don't seem shocked at all," she said, her voice dropping to a suspicious whisper. "I've delivered food to a lot of rich people," Seung-jae said, offering her a piece of toast. "They rise and fall like the tide. It's best not to overthink it. Now, hurry up. You have a big day at the office, and I need to make sure the car is ready." As he turned away to wash a pan, Mi-rae felt a chill go down her spine. The miracle had happened right after she cried herself to sleep in this man's home. She looked at his broad shoulders and the quiet way he moved. She still didn't have proof, but the suspicion was growing like a fire in her chest. Her driver wasn't just a worker. He was a guardian who moved mountains while she slept. Animal in the back of a smoky, underground gambling den. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from the future king of an empire to a man with a frozen bank account and a warrant out for his arrest. He had lost everything: his money, his reputation, and his power. His eyes were bloodshot, and his expensive suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. I want them dead, Kong hissed, slamming his fist onto a wooden table. Not just Mi-rae. I want that driver, that delivery boy, erased from the face of the earth. The leader of the Black Dragon Syndicate sat in the shadows, calmly sharpening a long, curved blade. He didn't look impressed by Kang's anger. Your money is gone, Director. Why should we help a ghost? Because she's still alive. Kang screamed. Kill the driver first. He's the one who found the files. He's the one who's been protecting her. If he dies, Mi-rae is defenseless. Take her life, take the company, take whatever you want. I just want to see that boy bleed. The syndicate leader paused, his eyes narrowing. He pulled a grainy photo from his pocket, a hidden camera shot of Seung-jae standing on his balcony the night before. This driver of yours, he has a specific way of standing. A way of looking at the world like he owns it. He tossed the photo onto the table. We've been tracking a ghost for 5 years. A man who disappeared and took the heart of the underworld with him. We called him the Emperor because no one could stand against him. We thought he was in another country, or perhaps dead. Kang looked at the photo, then back at the assassin. He's just a delivery boy. He rides a scooter. The syndicate leader began to laugh, a cold, dry sound that filled the room. You fool. You didn't hire a driver. You invited a lion into your house and tried to treat him like a dog. That delivery boy is the man we've been hunting since the day we took over this city. He's the only one who can take it all back. The leader stood up, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred and greed. We don't care about your company anymore, Kang. If we kill the Emperor, every gang from here to the border will bow to us. He's weak now. He's distracted by a woman. He turned to his men, who were already standing and reaching for their weapons. Prepare the team. We strike at the gala tomorrow night. We'll use the girl as bait. When the Emperor comes to save his queen, we'll make sure he never walks out again. Director Kang watched them, a sick smile forming on his face. He didn't care about the underworld or the Emperor. He only cared that the man who ruined him was finally going to die. The trap was set, and the most dangerous night in the city's history was about to begin. The grand ballroom was a sea of glittering gold and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the city's most powerful people. Mi-rae stood at the center of it all, wearing a stunning red dress that matched her newfound confidence. This gala was her victory lap, a public statement that she was back on her throne and stronger than ever. Near the back of the room, standing by the silver trays of champagne, was Seung-jae. He was back in a simple waiter's uniform, his visor cap pulled low to hide his face from the cameras. While the guests laughed and drank, his eyes never stopped moving. He wasn't looking at the jewelry or the fine art. He was watching the service entrances, the balconies, and the movements of the kitchen staff. You look tense, waiter, Mi-rae whispered, sliding past him to grab a glass. She gave him a playful, secret smile. She was starting to enjoy having a guardian angel hidden in plain sight. The air is too still, boss, Seung-jae muttered back, his voice barely audible. The security guards at the door are new faces. They aren't yours. Before Mi-rae could ask what he meant, the music died. It didn't fade away. It stopped with a sharp, electronic screech. Then the world went black. The massive chandeliers flickered and died, plunging the ballroom into total darkness. Screams of confusion erupted from the crowd. Moments later, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed shut with a thundering bang. The sound of heavy metal bolts sliding into place echoed through the hall. They were trapped. Nobody move! A voice boomed from the darkness. Suddenly, red emergency lights began to pulse, casting a bloody glow over the room. Men in dark tactical gear dropped from the ceiling vents and burst through the service doors. They weren't just common thugs. These were the elite soldiers of the Black Dragon Syndicate, armed with submachine guns and serrated blades. The guests huddled together, sobbing and trembling. The ballroom had been turned into a cage, a kill zone for the city's elite. Mi-rae felt a cold hand of terror wrap around her heart as she realized her security team had been neutralized in seconds. In the chaos, she reached out blindly, searching for the only person who made her feel safe. But the spot where the waiter had been standing was empty. Seung-jae was gone. Where is he? The syndicate leader roared, stepping into the red light. He didn't look at the billionaires or the politicians. He scanned the shadows, looking for one man. "We know you're here, Emperor. Show yourself, or the girl dies first." Mi-rae stood frozen as the barrels of a dozen guns turned toward her. She was the bait, and the trap had finally snapped shut. The red emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows across the ballroom as Director Kong stepped out from behind the line of armed men. He looked crazed, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He walked straight toward Mi-rae, pressing the cold barrel of a pistol against her temple. The guests gasped, but no one dared to move. "Do you see now, Mi-rae?" Kong hissed, his voice trembling with a sick kind of joy. "You think you were saved by a hero? You think that delivery boy is a good man?" Mi-rae stood perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He's a better man than you'll ever be," she spat, though her voice shook. Kong laughed, a jagged sound that chilled her blood. "He's a monster, you fool. That delivery boy is the Emperor of the Underworld. He is the most wanted criminal in Daxia, a man with enough blood on his hands to drown this entire city. He didn't save you out of kindness. He's just reclaiming his territory. You're nothing but a pawn to a criminal king." The words hit Mi-rae like a physical blow. She remembered the lethal speed in the garage, the way the high-end suit had fit him like armor, and the terrifying authority in his voice during that secret phone call. It all made sense now. The mystery wasn't a fairy tale, it was a nightmare. "Call him!" Kong screamed, digging the gun harder into her skin. "I know he's listening. Call your driver out so we can end this. Tell him to surrender, or I'll paint this red dress with your blood." Mi-rae looked out into the shifting shadows of the ballroom. She knew Seung-jae was there, watching from the darkness. If he stepped out now, he would be walking into a wall of bullets. Even an emperor couldn't survive a dozen machine guns at point-blank range. Everything she had achieved, her company, her money, her pride, suddenly felt worthless. If Seung-jae was a monster, he was the only monster who had ever cared for her. He had given up his peace to pull her out of the mud. "No," Mi-rae whispered. She looked toward the darkest corner of the room, her eyes filled with tears but her gaze steady. "Seung-jae, don't come out. Run. Leave me here." "Shut up," Kong roared, raising his hand to strike her. "I won't call him," she cried, closing her eyes tightly. "I'd rather die knowing he's free than see him in chains because of me." She waited for the sound of the gunshot, bracing herself for the end. She had lost her crown, her company, and now she was losing her life, but for the first time, she felt like she was the one in control. She was protecting the man who had spent every day protecting her. But instead of a gunshot, a cold, heavy silence fell over the room. The air grew thick and heavy, as if the oxygen was being sucked out of the hall. From the darkness, a low, calm voice vibrated through the floorboards. "You should have listened to her, Kong. Because now, I'm not the delivery boy anymore." The shadows at the edge of the ballroom seemed to melt away as Seung-jae stepped into the dim, red light. He walked with a slow, heavy rhythm that silenced the room. He wasn't rushing. He didn't look afraid. Every step he took made the armed syndicate members flinch and pull their triggers closer, yet none of them fired. The sheer weight of his presence held them back like an invisible wall. Stopping in the center of the hall, Seung-jae reached up and slowly removed his delivery visor. He tossed it onto the polished floor, where it slid across the marble like a discarded mask. Without the cap shadowing his face, his eyes burned with a cold, golden fire. He stood tall, his shoulders back, looking less like a servant and more like a god who had finally decided to stop playing human. "The girl told you to run," Director Kong yelled, his voice cracking with desperation as he kept the gun pressed to Mi-rae's head. "You should have listened. You're just one man." "Am I?" Seung-jae asked softly. Suddenly, the heavy, bolted oak doors of the ballroom didn't just open, they exploded inward. The sound was like a bomb going off. High-tech flash grenades blinded the syndicate gunmen, and before the smoke could even clear, hundreds of men in jet-black suits flooded the room. These weren't thugs, they were a professional army, moving with the silence and precision of ghosts. In a heartbeat, the Black Dragon assassins were disarmed and forced to their knees. The syndicate leader, who had been so arrogant moments ago, was pinned to the floor by two massive men whose faces were etched with scars of 100 battles. The army of black-suited men didn't turn to the guests or the exits. Instead, they turned toward Seung-jae. In one thunderous motion, hundreds of warriors dropped to one knee, bowing their heads so low they nearly touched the floor. "Welcome back, Emperor!" they roared in unison. The sound was so loud the crystal chandeliers above rattled and shook. "The world is yours to command." Director Kang's hand began to shake so violently that the gun clattered out of his grip and hit the floor. He stumbled back, his face turning a ghostly shade of white. He looked at the hundreds of elite soldiers, then at the man he had called trash and delivery boy. He realized he hadn't just tried to cheat his niece, he had tried to extort the most powerful man on the planet. Mi-rae stood frozen, watching the man who had driven her scooter, cooked her breakfast, and carried her bags. He wasn't a monster. He was a king. Seung-jae walked over to the trembling Director Kang. He didn't strike him. He didn't need to. He simply looked down at him with a gaze of pure, freezing pity. "You wanted to see the Emperor," Seung-jae said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "Take a good look. It's the last thing you'll ever see." The chaos of the night slowly faded into a quiet, golden morning. The ballroom was empty now. The syndicate members and Director Kang led away into a darkness they would never return from. Outside, the city began to wake up, completely unaware that its entire power structure had shifted overnight. Seung-jae stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out over the skyline. He was still wearing the black suit of an emperor, but he had tucked his old, crumpled delivery visor into his pocket. The air was fresh after the storm, and for the first time in years, the shadows didn't feel like a weight on his shoulders. The glass door slid open behind him. Mi-rae walked out, her red dress flowing in the breeze. She didn't approach him with the arrogance of a CEO or the fear of a victim. She walked to his side and leaned against the railing, looking at the city that they now, in their own ways, ruled together. Through her company and his silent protection, they held the fate of millions in their hands. "The news is calling it a stabilization of the markets," Mi-rae said softly, her eyes tracing the sun as it climbed over the buildings. "They have no idea that a war was won while they were sleeping." She turned to him, her expression turning serious. The question that had been burning in her heart finally came out. "Now that the threats are gone and your men have returned, are you going to disappear again? Are you going back to being a ghost?" Seung-jae looked at her. He saw the woman who had once rejected him, then trusted him, and finally tried to sacrifice herself for him. He realized that his search for peace hadn't ended when he found a scooter and a delivery job. It had ended when he found someone worth standing still for. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and steady. A small, genuine smile broke across his face, a look he had never shown the world during his time on the throne. "I spent a long time running away from who I was," he said, his voice as smooth as the morning air. "But I realized that a king without a home is just a wanderer. And I think I've finally reached my destination." He squeezed her hand gently. "The delivery is complete, Mi-rae. I'm not going anywhere." Mi-rae felt a wave of relief wash over her, a feeling of safety that no amount of money or security guards could ever buy. She squeezed his hand back, standing tall beside him. They were an unlikely pair, the heiress who had lost everything to find herself, and the emperor who had given up everything to find his heart. Together, they looked out at their city. They weren't just business partners or allies. They were equals. As the sun filled the sky, the world below began to move, unaware that it was now being watched over by a queen and her emperor.